Hello, everybody. Welcome. Let's get started. Tesla stock is up 1%. S&P 500 up 0.4%. Dow Jones up 0.6. Nasdaq is up 0.2. Russell 2000 up 0.6. VIX is down again to 17. Gold is down 1%. Lots of headlines on budget negotiations. I think this is going to go on for another couple of months, and then they're going to have to make a deal before the debt ceiling needs to be raised by August. They might raise a debt ceiling separately, but they're going to have to make a deal at some point this year, just because otherwise the tax rates would surge, and I that's not they're not going to help. They're not going to let that happen. Bernanke urges Fed to adopt alternative forecasting. Let's start with the Reuters article of the day, and then we can take it from there. Wall Street set for weekly gains on trade deal. Weak data curbs enthusiasm. Wall Street main indices were on track for weekly gains on Friday, buoyed by US-China tariff truce, though soft consumer sentiment data on the day kept risk-taking in check. Stocks briefly came off their highs after the University of Michigan surveys of consumers said its consumer sentiment index slumped further in May. We're going to take a look at that. And inflation expectations surged to 7% from 6.5% last month. Some of the market movements today reflected that the market has been a little bit torn between this desire for relief and the reality, said Julia Herman, global market strategist at New York Life. All three main indices were poised for weekly gains, and the S&P 500 was set for a fifth consecutive single-day gain. As a result, S&P 500 catapulted back into the green year to date. The market is currently leaning toward the optimistic side of things on the idea that lower tariffs might be able to support higher economic growth. However, what I see here is an opportunity for investors to use this relief to prepare for the next leg of reality, said Herman. Trump and British Prime Minister had announced a limited bilateral trade agreement last week. Focus would be on the comments from Fed policymakers, with at least two officials, including Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin, slated to speak throughout the day. House Budget Committee Chairman Arrington cautioned that Friday's planned vote on the tax bill might be delayed due to opposition to the measure. I think that failed subsequent to this article. Mega cap and growth stocks were mixed, with Alphabet advancing more than 1%, while Meta dipped in excess of 1%. Big tech was one of the biggest drivers on Wall Street this week, with the information technology sector heading towards a more than 7% gain. Applied Materials slipped 6% after the chip-making equipment maker missed estimates for the second quarter revenue. Let's take a look at that. Charter Communications was off session highs, but still up about 1% after media companies said it would buy privately held rival Cox Communications for $22 billion. Okay. Let's look at Applied Materials, and then we're going to take a look at consumer sentiment separately. Applied Materials misses revenue estimates amid uncertainty over export controls. Applied Materials missed Wall Street estimates for second quarter revenue on Thursday, weighed by less than expected sales in the chip-making equipment maker's biggest segment amid uncertainties around export curbs. Shares of the company fell more than 5% in extended trading. Revenue from the semiconductor systems segment, the largest contributor, was $5.26 billion, below analyst estimates of $5.32 billion. Applied Materials noted a slowdown in investment in ICAPS market, covering Internet of Things, communication, automotive, power, and sensors, but said this has been partially offset by huge investments in advanced chips. Clearly, the US government's export restriction of certain semiconductor equipment into China is impacting the company's results and outlook, said senior research analyst at Summit Insights Group. The US government had said in December new controls would be placed on the export of semiconductor manufacturing equipment needed to produce advanced node chips to China, Applied Materials' largest overseas market. The stock currently is down 6%. It's pretty much flat in the last 5 days. So it had a run up prior to this, up about 20% the last month, flat in the last 6 months, down 23% in 1 year. PE ratio of 20, dividend yield of 1, market cap of 133 billion. The company's revenue from China, which is engaged in a full-blown trade war, accounted for 25% of total sales during the second quarter, down from 43% a year earlier. Okay, I can take a look at that later. Any questions, comments, please request to speak or leave a comment on YouTube. Let's go to US consumer sentiment deteriorates further in March. I'm going to pull up the actual release and see if we can get anything from here. Let's see. Reports. They just have the table. They don't have the actual thing in here right now. Survey information. They just have the table. That's weird. The question they ask is, generally speaking, do you usually think of yourself as a Republican, a Democrat, independent, or what? Yeah, and then so they have this separate. I mean, the thing here is that the Republicans are also now expecting higher inflation. So both sides are increasing their expectations of inflation in the last year, as well as a 5-10 year period. But Democrats are expecting much higher inflation than Republicans still. So there might be some political views expressed in this thing as opposed to the actual. Um, it might, I mean, it's definitely more noise than signal. The question is if there's any signal. US consumer sentiment slumped further in May while 1 year inflation expectations surged as households remained concerned about the economic impact of President Trump's aggressive and often erratic trade policies. Consumer sentiment index dropped to 50.8 this month from a final reading of 52.2 in April. Economists polled by Reuters had forecast the index rising to 53.4. Tariffs were spontaneously mentioned by nearly three-quarters of consumers, up from almost 60% in April. Uncertainty over trade policy continues to dominate consumers thinking about the economy. Slight increase in sentiment this month for independents were offset by a 7% decline among Republicans. Slight increase in sentiment this month for independents were offset by a 7% decline among Republicans. Consumers' 12-month inflation expectations jumped to 7.3% from 6.5% in April. Both Democrats and Republicans anticipated higher inflation in the near term. Okay. All right. Let's see if anything else. Looks like F-150 Lightning passed Cybertruck in sales, and I don't think Cybertruck will ever make it to profitability. So I think Tesla is going to lay off a bunch of people soon. I think starting maybe next month, more likely in Q3. And I expect tens of thousands of people being laid off in Tesla. I pinned this at the top of our screens. I think early signs of kind of giving people a week off during Memorial Day for Cybertruck Model Y lines. And production isn't expected to increase next year either. So I think Tesla will have to end up laying off tens of thousands of people, maybe as high as 30, 40,000 people in the next 18 months or so. And I think this is going to start very soon. They have to, otherwise they're going to turn negative gross margin, just like Rivian. So they don't want to be in the shoes of Rivian. So they're going to have to lay off tens of thousands of people to keep the costs in check. Big short investor Michael Burry doubles stake in cosmetics maker Estee Lauder. He also bought puts in Nvidia and sold all of his other positions. Michael Burry's Scion Asset Management has doubled its stake in Estee Lauder at a time when the beauty giant's new CEO is steering the company through a transformation to overcome weak demand in key markets such as North America and China. The U.S. investor, whose bets against the U.S. housing market before the 2008 financial crisis were chronicled in the movie The Big Short, now owns 200,000 shares of Estee valued at $13 million, according to a regulatory filing on Thursday. This is double the number of shares it held at the end of December last year. Barry's bet suggests belief in Estee Lauder's ability to reclaim its status, blah, blah, blah. Barry slashed the number of companies in his portfolio by roughly half to 7, the regulatory filing showed. He bought puts on Nvidia, apparently. We'll take a look at that later. Any questions, comments, please request to speak or leave a comment on YouTube in live chat. Jamie Dimon, time as JP Morgan CEO is winding down, investors are saying do not go. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon's time as top boss is winding down when his stature on Wall Street and in the nation's capital is arguably at an all-time high. Investors, as a result, may not be ready for the 69-year-old executive's exit the stage just yet. They're saying, Jamie, don't go. Wells Fargo analyst Mike Mayo, who has covered JP Morgan for decades, told Yahoo Finance. He has more public clout than he's ever had before in his life, Mayo added, and that clout comes hand in hand with his position at JP Morgan. Diamond's succession is the single biggest idiosyncratic risk factor for JP Morgan stock, according to a Bank of America analyst. Thus, the question of Diamond's future plans will be front of mind for investors this coming Monday as they gather inside JP Morgan's Manhattan headquarters for the bank's annual Investor Day. The event is a chance for the CEO and his top lieutenants to provide updates on operations across the nation's largest bank. Some of these lieutenants, including Consumer Chief Marianne Lake, are considered to be Diamond's potential successors. Last year at the same event, we're going to skip this one. Let me see if there's anything else. Michael Burry bets against Nvidia Chinese stocks via put options. Hedge fund manager and founder of Scion Asset Manager Michael Burry has bought put options against chipmaker Nvidia and Chinese web stocks JD.com, TMU parent Baidu, and Alibaba, according to the latest 13F filings. Thales False Medicine Mills speaks more on Burry's firm holdings and Nvidia increasing stake in CoreWeave. 13F filings, which are quarterly disclosures required by SEC for institutional investors. It was made famous by the firm film. It was famous before this film, but anyway, this is a guy who bet against housing market in 2008, liquidated the majority of his portfolio. Not required in disclosure is the behind the move, so we don't know exactly why he's selling Nvidia. But when it comes to Chinese stocks, there's previously a buyer and has slowly been unwinding his positions. All right. Oil prices are up 1% to $62 per barrel. We also had housing starts and building permits coming lower than expected today. I think the construction jobs are going to start turning negative. So we're going to start seeing some layoffs in the construction sector as well. I don't think the housing market is doing as well as people expect, and I don't think these rates are going down as quickly as people expect. and housing affordability is at a record low right now with these rates. So I think construction jobs, as well as some automotive jobs, manufacturing jobs, are starting to weaken quite a bit. So we should start seeing layoffs soon. And I think Tesla will probably lead in layoffs. On that note, um, I think Brad had some questions on Optimus. I'm going to send him an invite to speak to ask his questions. If he wants to, he can come up. Otherwise, we're going to end the space. I'll give it a 20 seconds so that listeners can hear. There's a delay still in these X spaces. Brad, I sent you an invite to speak. You can come up to speak and ask your questions if you want. All right. Well, I guess Brad doesn't want to come up. On that note, thank you very much, everybody. And I will chat with you all next time. Take care.